Hi, this is Steve Gillmor, and this is the Gillmor Gang. Welcome to all of our viewers that are coming in from Mars. And, it's the first intergalactic broadcast that we are aware of.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have Seth Goldstein hopefully joining us in a few minutes, but to begin with, we have a special guest who's been here a number of times and wowed the Twitter sphere. Now he's a member of Google. Used to be a member of the Open Stack Foundation. Now he's a member of the Open Social Foundation. No, I'm just kidding. Chris Messina, welcome.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Also, formerly of Google, now of Ribbit. What is the derivation of Ribbit? Is that like a frog, basically?
It is a frog noise. They like the name. This place is actually full of stuffed frogs.
You mean the French people, or what?
I think the answer is yes.
No. An Englishman cannot help but laugh at that joke, no matter how pathetic it might be.
It's sad, but this is true.
It is sad. Okay. And I'm the saddest one because I made the joke. And, of course, the infamous Robert Scoble.
What's up?
All right. So let's start with Google. There's been a lot of interesting announcements this week in the so-called social space, but Google wasn't one of them. How's social going over there?
It's going all right. I think we're continuing to I think invest in a bunch of platform features and things like that. I think have focused on a number of features around Buzz, launching some API features and things like that lately, but we're kind of just got our heads down right now.
And why do you think that is? Why having your heads down? You seem to have unlimited resources, if your numbers are to be believed, which I'm certain they are.
Yeah, it's having a lot of resources, especially financial resources, doesn't always translate into having infinite resources. And I think that one of the things that we have to do is actually develop product that we think is great and that works well and that we're really satisfied with. So that's part of the job is getting our heads down and focusing.
All right, well, since I can't get you to say anything about what you're doing, how about what everybody else is doing? What do you think of the Facebook Bing announcements?
I think it's a logical step forward for them. I think that I've been watching sort of with bated breath what Facebook and Bing have been sort of working on. I think that the integration both on Facebook.com and that Bing just rolled out is sort of maybe a down payment on where I think a lot of this stuff is going. And I think a lot of the search providers are trying really hard to figure out the appropriate way of actually incorporating a lot more social functionality into search results. I mean, Google has had your sort of circles available for a while, where you can search through your friends' public status updates, and that's been out there for a while. We at Google use the Social Graph API to sort of look at existing relationships that are public that are on the web to enhance search results. So it sort of makes sense that these things are starting to roll out.
Chris, the chat room, Kenny is warning you that I'm not a fan of Google. I don't think that's accurate. I think I'm a huge fan of Google. The more that they push Android forward, the more that the iPhone rules the world. So there's that.
What do you mean by that?
I think that, the Harlem Globetrotters have the Washington Senators, or what is it, the Washington Generals. They have to have somebody to play in order to win.
I see.
Yeah. I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, isn't that clearly the financial announcements show that it doesn't really matter what happens as long as search continues to grow, right?
Mm. Yeah, I think, and also just expanding the ways in which digital technology is made available to people in their regular lives when they're not sitting in front of the computer. I think that's one of the things that I've been seeing as more and more of a common trend that, a lot of us in the Valley tend to imagine the world as spending a lot of time in front of laptops and computers all the time, and I'm sure that happens to a great degree. But I think more and more people are accessing, web services with handsets and mobile devices in a way that hasn't happened at the scale that it has lately, and that requires us to, I think, up our game in a number of areas, including, Android and Google TV and places like that.
Right, and it requires Apple to up its game.
That's
it
right.
puts pressure where it needs to be applied in opening up their platform while Google tries to close down theirs.
That's an interesting perspective.
I knew you'd like it.
So I can't say I agree with it, but it's an
All right,
interesting perspective.
Robert,
So how's Google closing down theirs?
what do you mean? No,
Explain
as
Google?
they close down theirs. This is a forward-looking, announcement.
Is it?
I mean, you close down. In other words, turn these things into revenue. I mean, last time I looked, the Google black box is expanding rapidly. We don't have access to the search algorithms, do we?
This is true.
Okay, or the data that's being collected from everybody.
Depends on which areas you're looking for. There's quite a bit that's available to the owners of that data.
Okay, well, now that you're actually getting past the softballs here, I'm going to interrupt you and bring Robert Scoble in. Robert?
I don't know that I have anything but softballs right now.
That's fine.
What?
What?
Hang on.
I mean, what we're all waiting for is what is Vic and Dutra's team, which I assume you guys are on that team. What you guys are all going to announce in a month or two, and we're just waiting for the TechCrunch leak to pop up and expose it to the world.
What do you mean? You're talking about the presumed social announcements?
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
I'll read it when you guys read it.
What I really want to know is, can I get a ride on that car?
Yeah, I think
You're not going to tell me anything about what's coming.
we'll start offering that as a prize for people that come up with great ideas.
What about Apple and social? I guess that was a good question from Jeremy in the chat room.
Which specific area? I think that's a really interesting question. Have you guys actually spent any time using Ping?
I have quite a bit.
Yeah? And what do you think?
How's that going for you?
It's very limiting, and it's a great way to buy more iTunes music.
Yeah, I think it's a great example of social being used as a supplement to selling things. And I think that it's a really interesting experiment to watch. Because I think that actually the experience that I had with it, especially in iTunes, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if you try iTunes on the iPhone and you experience Ping in a mobile sense, it starts to actually make a little more sense. So it could be that social networking in client applications like the iTunes app, and maybe even Spotify in some respects, doesn't quite make as much sense as interacting with a social community that's engaged in music or interested in music on a mobile device. So I can imagine a bunch of kids being in high school, checking out new bands and liking things and sharing content to people on mobile devices in a way that we just don't see people do in desktop environments.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw a curveball, not a softball. I had dinner with Mark Sester at VC down in LA, and he threw out a theory that Evan Williams was actually kicked out of the CEO position because he wasn't willing to monetize Twitter. If you were at Twitter, how would you monetize it?
That's interesting.
Well, before you opine on that, I think that's ludicrous. Go ahead. I don't think
tend to agree with that assessment.
Evan, he owns what 60% of the company. He's not getting thrown out of anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And and they've got a business to build. So I think that they've been really smart, actually letting Twitter evolve and turn into what it's going to be, and allowing its members to feel a good deal of ownership over the network. What Twitter has done is, of course, created a new medium. And whenever you create a new medium, that provides a lot of opportunities to figure out how to inject other types of perhaps leverage content into that medium that is more financially oriented or commerce oriented. I think that Twitter has an interesting challenge of figuring out how to offer better personalization. So in terms of people getting what they want out of the stream, following, of course, is a huge signal. It signals a great deal of intent, but it's unclear whether or not the commercial signals mixed in with social signals, and this is true of all companies building social applications and social relationships online, how to fit those commercial messages amidst personal and social messages. So I think that is one of the challenges that Twitter has to kind of like figure out. And they're doing some interesting experiments with the sponsored tweets and with the sponsored topics. So those are areas that might help, but I'm not entirely sure either yet. However, actually, I will say that the new design for new Twitter presents a great opportunity actually for, let's say if I'm a movie studio, to create a great experience where I'm publishing content as part of a promotional campaign leading up to a movie coming out, and then throughout the movie actually being out in theaters, and then after the movie's done. And because they now have rich media embedded in the web view, in the web client, that means that they can actually sell that space and sell experiences that otherwise might be very hard to create. So I think that actually is a good precondition towards getting into display ads and other types of things that we see on like MySpace's homepage, but are not integrated well into that social environment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the feeling that you get now from all of the Twitter interfaces, pretty much, the Facebook, the web, and the iPad and the iPhone interfaces all have a sense of stability and robustness that frankly I thought they'd never get to, and I think I think your point about personal versus business or however you are wanting to put that, the notion of personal data, I think, is key to what we're going through now, which is that I was talking to Tina before the show and asking her, what is it that's the most how do you use these networks these days? Is it different than the way it used to be? And she said, yeah, she's using it as kind of an emotional gut check, if you will. I mean, she didn't say it that way, but I'm paraphrasing it. That what we use these networks for these days is to try and get a handle on what people are doing, how frequently they're going out, things like Foursquare, etc., and just sort of getting an emotional read on what's going on a daily basis and on up to the real-time basis, and that personal confidence in the ability to be able to achieve a return on investment, if you will, that's reasonable. In other words, not what having to be Robert Scoble and follow everything in the universe in order to be able to distill that, but rather take advantage of the Robert Scobles and others to be able to start to harness together some sort of a reasonable interface. I don't think anybody's there yet in their individual silos, and I certainly don't think that there's an aggregate that's a tool or tools that are yet allowing us to do this. But I think that that is going to be where we're going to see the next generation of tools come from, and services, obviously. Thoughts?
Yeah, and there's something else that I would add to that too. I think from an advertiser / marketer perspective, you mentioned that people are using these networks as kind of a way of gathering social signals or finding out what's going on with their friends and their peers. It seems to me that a lot of marketers are becoming savvy to both the real-time web and to the kind of social signals that are made available through these networks. And so from what I understand, Twitter is doing a lot of work to build up analytics in terms of understanding what's actually happening with their network. And when you have a certain volume of content constantly flowing through a system, you can actually develop some very sophisticated models to understand how your content is performing, what the reactions are, and how to tailor those responses in real time in a way that otherwise would be very hard to do. So I think that that's one of the values that certainly I think Dick Costello is going to be focused on, having worked at FeedBurner and done analytics there. And of course, with their own URL shortener, they're able to track links and to see what's happening. So you combine pretty strong behavioral identity identity that emerges over time based on people's use of a system, and the ability to track the viral channels of sharing content and media through that medium. And you have a pretty powerful package where people will actually spend money to be able to enter into that stream in a way that's savvy and sophisticated, as opposed to just kind of like blasting out, deals every 5 minutes to a bunch of people that, have already redeemed that deal. So I think that's one of the things that we'll see changing, that they can actually take advantage of.
Yeah, and also the trick to social media, if in my opinion, is figuring out how to incentivize people to actually generate the metadata and then we combine and parse in order to be able to produce streams in return that are valuable to people. So, just the broadcast model in and of itself, it may have created the economic rationale for building up these networks, but that doesn't mean that that's where the value is going to come from. I think it'll come from these much more organic and dynamic groups that fluctuate and emerge. And I want to use that as a transition point to Robert, talking a little bit about your feelings about the groups implementation on Facebook.
I like the groups implementation mostly. It goes beyond Twitter in that it actually does something where when you follow on Twitter, it doesn't seem to do much. But if you're friended on a group, and if I add you on a group and I've added a bunch of people on a group, you can actually invite other people into that group and you can talk to that group. And you can even chat with any member of that group. It's pretty cool and a little bit spammy and a little bit viral, which I think was done on purpose to make this feature spread quickly. But I like it. The problem is that it doesn't seem to work very well for groups that don't have a strong emotional tie to each other. It seems to work very well for family groups. It's a great way for me to separate my family stuff out of the stream and have a place to talk to, my brother and my nephews and my wife and other people who are in our family. I've started groups of CEOs and press people and influencers, and some of those groups have gotten some engagement, but not as much as I would have expected. And so I wonder where it's going from a use case, because Zuckerberg, when I interviewed him, said, well, we were trying to do a Yahoo group better than Yahoo groups. And I'm not sure it's hit the stride with that kind of use case yet, but certainly for family and places where there's a strong emotional tie to each other, I think it's very positive there.
Kevin, what do you think?
Well, I think that's by design. I think they're trying not to get sort of giant Scoble groups, and they are trying to get people to construct their real life groups. That's what they were saying about the target of it.
Yeah, but anybody who's been betting on the idea that okay, Seth's available, Tina, if you want to try and bring him in. Anybody who's betting on what the designers of software think is going to happen as opposed to what the users do
no.
is just going to lose.
That's what I'm saying. But they've got some good affordances in there.
You're shaking your head, Chris. Do you disagree with that?
The point is that what they've got there is that they've got the ability for the people who are the tumblers, the people who connect each other, to construct the groups and try and organize people, and then they've got the people's ability to leave them again and try and restructure that. So there's some ability to do that. I think there may still be some awkwardness about being joined to some family group you then feel obliged to stay in and not leave, or to some group that absolutely
the dynamics of how it works.
Still be tricky. Yeah. And you can do sort of dubious things like create a group of dickheads and sign a bunch of people up to it, make one of the administrator and leave.
Thank God I'm not a member of that group yet.
There's the ability to sort of play games with it. I'm sure we will see sort of hazing and stuff done with it as well. But
that's retarded because there's a retardant on that kind of behavior, because only your friends can invite you into a group. And if you're a friend with somebody who hazes you, then you're quickly going to say, sorry, you're not my friend anymore. Goodbye. Right. And I'm going to leave this group and not let you invite me into any more groups. Goodbye. And so there's this built-in checks and balances on that kind of system where people are not going to abuse this. I find that I've invited hundreds of people into these groups and they're not being abused yet because nobody wants to be kicked out of a cool group.
But the other half of that is that this will militate against Facebook being usable for the sort of massively connected celebrity. I've already sort of seen bits of that happen where somebody famous gets connected to 2,000 groups, says bugger this, and backs away from Facebook, whereas Twitter continues to actually work quite well for someone with ridiculous numbers of people following
Well,
them.
first of all,
So
a celebrity has some problems with Facebook anyways, because you can only have 5,000 friends. And so if you're, I hit that limit 18 months ago, two years ago. And I quickly learned that putting people over into a fan page is a lot better, or whatever they call them now, the public page. I have a public page at facebook.com/Scobleizer, and then I have my personal page at facebook.com/Robert Scoble. And people learn that even celebrities learn very quickly that Facebook is really better if you friend people you actually know and you actually like, rather than people you don't have any emotional attachment to. And I did that a year ago, right? I cleaned out my Facebook and I went back to only friending people who I've actually met, that I can tell somebody a story about, or that I have some emotional attachment to, a family member, whatnot. And Facebook is better when it's used in that kind of social graph. If you're polluting your social graph with people you don't know, then you're going to have problems with this world, and you're going to realize that pretty quickly with these new groups. Absolutely. But it's very easy to unfollow a group. And then when you unfollow a group, by the way, you also block that person from inviting you into any future groups. So I've marked you as a pariah if I unfollow your group. And most people don't want to be marked as pariahs. Therefore, most people want to participate in social structures, and most people will not invite you into things that are going to cause you trouble. Now, there's always going to be a case or two where somebody invites, Mike Arrington into a NAMBLA group, but that very quickly is going to go away, and that is not going to become the rule here, because most people want to be participatory with Mike and not get kicked out of his life.
Actually, it's funny that you say all this, Robert, because I had originally wanted to write a blog post about Facebook's implementation of groups, because David Corden always accuses me of not saying anything nice about them, and that's not true. But in this case, I really like their implementation of groups, and it's for a number of the reasons that you actually mentioned. And when the initial feature launched, I know that you had a post, and several other folks in the Technorati had posts about the failings of the Facebook groups model. Perhaps that was like your knee-jerk reaction. It's not like this, it's not like this, it's very different. I don't get it, or it doesn't work the way that I need it to. But to me, when I sort of got into it, started using it, and saw that it failed for people with massive amounts of friends, I sort of intuitively knew that they'd actually gotten it right. Because most people on Facebook don't have these massive hordes of friends, and those who do are kind of doing it wrong. Yeah. If Facebook's supposed to be about your real friends and the people that you connect with in your real life, then you do the self-selection of who you actually trust to involve you in different conversations, and who would actually, who you would trust to add you into a certain context that wouldn't embarrass you. And if they
the
do,
other thing
then
is
you can unfollow them.
Facebook made some really smart design decisions for people who are going to start these massive groups. If you get over 250 users in a group, which can happen pretty quickly, because you can make a group where everybody can invite in their friends, and so that's potentially a very exponential growth curve if a group is interesting, right? Imagine if Bill Gates and Steve Jobs started a group, and it would very quickly get very exponential very quickly, because people would keep inviting more and more people.
Yeah, but we already know what that dynamic is, because the difference between somebody with 5,000 friends and 10,000 is irrelevant.
Right, but because once I friend you into a group, you can invite all your friends, and then when you pull in your friends, they can invite in all their friends. So you can get out of control.
Yeah, but I feel like that's a learning process. I mean, this is it's an early medium, and this design decision was no different than. I mean, it's actually the exact same permissions model that they have with Facebook Places. So increasingly, and what I think is really interesting about this change is that who you choose to friend on Facebook actually is starting to matter, because it impacts your experience of consuming Facebook. Yep. There are very few networks, it seems at least, that make friending people or trusting people in the network actually powerful. And so as that happens, I think that we will start to see the cementing of sort of closer ties.
Yeah, or the contouring. the contouring of these
Yeah.
groups.
Yeah,
You know, the
anyways,
sort of dynamic.
once a group grows over
reselection.
250 people, the group's feature set actually changes. You can no longer chat with
Sure.
with each other. The spamminess of the email notifications goes way down, and it protects the groups from
Right.
these super groups. It protects the members of these groups from the spamminess and
Speaking
the bad
of-
behavior of a super group.
Speaking of protecting people from groups, Seth Goldstein, welcome. You have to talk so I can tell whether we can hear you or not.
Hi, Steve. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Thanks.
Yeah.
So you can lurk here for a second. We're talking about Facebook and the new groups feature. If you haven't figured that
So I
out.
have one, I guess, design flaw with Facebook groups so I tried to upload. So I had uploaded a bunch of pictures into an album on my own profile, and then I started a group, and I wanted to transfer that album to be permissioned to a group. So I didn't want to share my picture album with anybody. I just wanted to share it with a group. And then when I went and opened up the group, I could only add pictures by uploading them from my computer or via webcam. Did anybody else find that?
That actually kind of makes sense, though. I mean, I think that the reality is that the way that these features are designed is that groups are intended to be a place or a space that you go to. And in the way that people conceive of the digital online environment, I think it's more concrete than a lot of us in technology tend to sort of imagine. And so if you imagine going to a room in your house and then doing an activity because you know that whatever the computer's there or the TV's there or the sewing machine's there or whatever it is, it sort of makes sense that you go to the room first and then you sort of contribute the photos or the content that you want only in that context. Imagining that you sort of upload everything first to sort of one big repository and then you figure out where it goes seems to be the wrong order of operations. At least it seems to me.
Okay.
Well, part
so
of it
I
was
guess
that public was easier than deciding. That this is the
Yes,
issue. So it
that's
was
right.
easier to make something fully public on the web and then just tell a few people about it than decide ahead of time who am I sharing this with. Make that decision with everything you publish.
Well, because otherwise then you're just doing email, right? I mean, email basically has a to and a CC and a BCC fields, and what Facebook and Twitter did is they removed those fields and they made the default everyone. The problem was that they had to later
or a
add
subgroup.
in, yeah, or a subgroup, but later they had to add in, those filters so you could actually target messages at different individuals and give you the option of saying, well, actually, this is not for everyone. This is for a discrete set of audiences, and how you provide those interfaces for people becomes challenging over time. So I think that
Right.
Facebook's model is actually creating a physical space. It's more like architecture, again, building buildings or houses, to allow people to have a conceptual framework for using these tools, as opposed to just putting everything in the stream, which feels like a public place where everything that goes in there sort of goes to everyone because, as Zuckerberg said, no one really created lists
Well, except Scoble.
except Scoble.
And 13,000
So what-
of my
what is the
friends because I'm on a
primary-
bunch of them.
What?
Are you
Go
talking
ahead.
about Facebook?
Seth, go
No,
ahead.
on Twitter. On Twitter, the
Oh, I'm sorry.
lists are
Okay.
used by a small percentage of people, but that still equals tens of thousands
Right.
of
Well,
people.
what
Yeah.
you're referring to is that Facebook lists didn't really take off because people don't actually like to configure their software; they just want to use it.
Right.
All right, Seth, were you saying something?
Yeah, again, I don't know if there's a narrow use case or a broad one, but so I use iPhoto to upload my pictures, and then I export them. I share them from iPhoto to Facebook. It doesn't support groups now. Will it support groups?
The iPhoto uploader? That's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I know that Groups is part of the Graph API right now, so you can at least inspect and get attributes of groups out as long as you're authorized to access that. But I don't know about the idea of posting to groups specifically. I imagine, Recording would have the answer for that because I don't know. But I would think that functionality will be eventually exposed over the API.
Makes
Well,
sense.
Interestingly, now that you are able to export these things, albeit in a zip file.
Have you actually downloaded your data yet?
No, because the only thing I've ever sent to Facebook are these videos that I shot with David Sanborn and Phil Ramone about 2 years ago, which have been trapped inside there. So the zip file will probably be about 700 gigabytes.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm exaggerating to make the point, which is that it's not very useful, but it does imply that if you can start to round trip these things, that perhaps they will be more malleable about allowing you to access them programmatically.
Well, I think that there's an interesting conversation for us to have about what Facebook did with their download. I don't know if Kevin or Robert have had the experience of downloading their data yet.
Yes,
but,
I got mine down. Yeah.
Okay. But it's interesting because, of course, a lot of us, again, in the technorati tend to think about downloading or exporting your data as I might, in terms of the way that I think about taking my money out of a bank and being able to transfer it to a new bank and still having all the same value that I had before. In the case of the data that you get from Facebook, that's not quite the case. And part of it is because there's not a consistency of formats that would allow that type of interchange. And part of it is because there's a good bit of data that's actually removed from the download, from the export, whether it's data that's sort of shared in common, in which case there's sort of a quasi lease ownership thing where it's hard to say who actually owns the data, but if no one can get it out, but only Facebook is the only one that has access to it, it sort of raises interesting ownership questions. And the other piece is just what do you do with it once you have it? I can imagine having dozens of these zip files over the course of history using Facebook, and really you just kind of open them up and they're kind of like little bundles of your status updates and your messages all composed in like these long HTML files, and it's unclear exactly what you can do with it. It's great to be able to get my photos out. I love that. I love that I can get my videos out, and I love that I can get sort of like the raw data out. But it's sort of like the Basecamp export, which is this big XML file. There's currently no place that you can take that export and actually do anything meaningful with it.
Yeah. Well, also they're not actually putting enough structure in it.
That's what I mean.
They could put the microformats in that express all that stuff. It's not there. They don't link back to the bits that are external links, except for the videos that embed the ones that are still on Facebook and just give you a link to the local one. Also, the videos seem to come out at the lower quality rather than the quality you uploaded. But I guess that's fair enough because that's what they have on their servers.
My understanding is that they want to be able to give you the highest res that you originally uploaded things in, and it's true that they might have done some transcoding when things got to the server. So
it may be older ones, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that it's great that Facebook took this step.
It's good stuff. Yeah.
I think that it's there will be probably people that are able to build little hacks that sort of show off the data that's in the zip file. And as a first step, I think it's a step in the right direction.
Well, I think it's very clever because it basically takes this whole data portability scam off of everybody's plate and puts it where it belongs, which is with hackers. But the underlying, Seth, this is for you, of course. The underlying notion of who owns the data, I think, is starting to become very interesting, particularly with the Facebook Bing announcements. Danny Sullivan, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but that's okay because he wrote this endless story on this. I assume everybody's read it, or at least part of it.
Yep.
It's very long. I thought that he typed slower than you did, Robert, but apparently not.
No.
But I think that the sort of decoupling of the behavior, the so-called gestures around likes and shared pointers to articles that are now being. I'm not sure that reading Danny's commentary, I'm not sure whether or not you actually can dive in and get the shared articles citations, but you certainly can get the likes, and to intermingle that or stream splice it in effect with Bing seems to be the first example of extrapolating monetization from how we behave with social objects as opposed to creating them. Seth, any comments?
Well, there are faces in search results, which I think is a pretty profound step. I haven't been able to use the Bing social features, but from what I've seen, I think it's something that we've talked for a long time about that's coming, which is from page-based searching to people-based searching. I wonder at what point does Facebook make their own search functionality really compelling and start to, instead of having a web-centric model that integrates people, what will it look like when we have a people-centric model that integrates the web?
If you go to Facebook and search on Steve Gillmor, for instance, it'll tell you whether he's your friend or not. I'm glad to know that Steve is still my friend.
But what's your point, Robert?
I'm just saying that's what how it expresses. It's a good place to go and look up people's names, and if they're not your friend, you can try to friend them on Facebook.
Well, to me, what's interesting about
Google
this...
does that for me as well. I mean, I've logged into Google, I get a thing for Steve Gillmor saying I know him through Identica and TechCrunch and a whole bunch of stuff because there's the social search stuff that Google shipped a year ago. It depends.
At least a year ago. I mean, I haven't filled out the profile except when I was extorted by Buzz to do it. And, I think there's a difference between reverse engineering your identity and tapping into what, has been a much broader contribution base. The thing I think is most significant about the Bing Facebook is that once you start to take a look at these items, and as Danny points out, once they start to be returns of those types of items, right now it's not a particularly active search or sort into the overall Bing search. But once that's going to start to incentivize people to contribute in that model. And once that happens, we're going to start to get a feedback loop or a fallback loop that's going to really start to take off, and which I'm sure will be emulated by Google to the extent that they can brute force, crack open the likes infrastructure.
Right.
I'm trying to get, I want to see him shaking his head, and then we wait until he talks. Okay, can you do that again? Yeah. Okay. So what does that mean?
I think part of it is just that Google's done a lot to focus on personalization over the last couple of years, and part of the benefit that Google has is that people trust it with a lot of their intention in terms of how and when they search. So there's a lot of things that Google can do and has already done to a great degree, and you've seen this sort of manifest through Google Instant and other types of personalization, where just the mere fact that people are using Google as much as they do gives us some great signals to improve the search experience. Adding social and the social graph layer to that allows us to provide those additional connected-based results that come from the people that you're connected to on other networks and other websites. And I think that that's a really good thing. I think that Google's really interested in continuing to improve the signals that it gets from people, so that when you point out there's the difference between deriving this data from public data that's sort of out there on the web versus the contribution model where people are providing this information to Google in an explicit way, and especially data that, of course, can be private between several parties, then those are signals when people are opted into those features that enable us to provide just a better overall search experience.
Well, isn't that the impact of Android as linked up with the announcements about revenue? Is when people are on their phones, they've already sort of gotten over the hurdle of well, am I going to say who I am? I mean, no, you're saying who you are every time you walk 10 feet.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, and that's why I think actually there's a lot of interesting things to think about when you look at what Apple is doing with Ping. Though I think Ping, of course, is much more focused on media right now, and music and videos, and selling more of that content. And what Facebook might want to do if Facebook were to develop their own, OS. So, for me, of course, identity has been very important and very central to a lot of the work that I've done for the last couple of years. And nowhere is that more relevant than on a mobile device, where in many cases you authenticate first the device, and then you're able to use your apps or to buy things in the case of the iPhone, and to do other interesting, useful things. So once identity becomes just part of the OS, then you start to be able to enable all sorts of interesting personalization where people don't have to think about passwords anymore, because they have already authenticated to that device, and they trust and they protect that device as though it were themselves or an extension of themselves. So that's when I think this stuff does get very interesting, and I'm definitely watching very closely the stuff that's emerging there.
That was one of the interesting things about the Windows Phone launch, was that they
Yeah.
have very explicitly done that, and they've hooked into the activity streams
Yep.
standard infrastructure there to make that phone part of that sort of web infrastructure too. So that was quite a savvy move by them, by Microsoft.
Yeah. Actually, I think that Rob Dolan in particular has done a great job actually getting Microsoft involved in the specification work around activity streams. We're finally getting close to the point where we're going to have a 1.0 version of the Atom activity stream spec. It's been a long time coming, but now that we actually have implementations, that is sort of like the right preconditions to have before you standardize something. So the fact that Buzz is supporting it, Microsoft supporting it, Facebook supports it, Opera supports it, BBC supports it, and down the line, I think is actually a very positive thing. And in so much as Microsoft is specifically using activity streams and the concept of digital identity on a mobile device in an integrated way, starts to pave the way for new types of experiences that we previously weren't able to have because of the lack of specificity in the data that was being syndicated from all these social contexts. So we're moving from like the blogging era of the social web, when you'd sort of put these missives and these blobs of content out into the world, into the Twitter annotations, activity streams
There you go.
world, where there's actually a greater deal of, and the Open Graph protocol, where there's a greater amount of clarity in terms of the intentionality and in terms of what people mean when they share different types of content.
Right. That's something I've been thinking about a lot in the last few days, because I'm trying to. This is a feeling that I'm getting that's somewhat similar to around the time that Seth and I started working, and Dave Sifry started working on the whole notion of attention. This is probably 5 years ago. And it's not that I have any kind of clear understanding of it, but there's this nagging feeling that was addressed by what Tina and I were talking about this emotional kind of underpinning for why we actually use these technologies, and therefore, if that's the case, then how efficiently we can actually tease that important data out becomes the nature of what's going to bubble up in the near term. So the notion of it's so hard to put my finger on it, but it seems like there's this signaling. What happened when RSS was deprecated, there are people who think that it hasn't been, but they don't have $1 billion, and the people that realized that it was deprecated, are now the richest people in the world. So let's talk about them for a second. There are Hollywood movies about those guys. So what's happened is that the object that was, as you pointed out, Chris, the blog post, the so-called content, has been decoupled from the signal about the content. And the signal about the content has been overlaid and overweighted with this social graph data that describes not only who is interested in that or who is promoting that, but also the groups that materialize that are being identified around the network. So if I think it's going to come down to taking the notion of @mentions, or it's sort of a hybrid between your hashtag model and the @mention model, as promoted by a number of these frameworks, and basically start to signal overlapping groups based on identifiers, @Steve Gillmor, at Scobleizer, etc., as a way of identifying and allowing people to aggregate into a sort of a working group around something. This isn't about a topic, and it's not about people. It's about the hybrid of that. That's
right.
going to.
It's a group of people interested in the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and as a result, it allows for the whole notion of track to emerge, which is that people will use track services to monitor those things, and they will also use these groups as a way of inserting themselves into that conversation.
So I think that's an interesting way of portraying this vision. I think that, I know that you've been a longtime fan of Track, and it's great that Buzz has it now. And one of the things, I think, to your point about what's great about Track is that it allows these ad hoc associations to emerge over time. And that was sort of like the conceptual model for hashtags, where people could post a signal into a stream, and through the aggregation of those signals in that stream, allow people to find one another by sort of merging all those different mediums together and having, sparks of interest, glom together. And I think that one thing that I never quite saw from a pivoting perspective on your concept around Track was how it connects to the people, and that the operative thing is not the content or the subject or the hashtag, but the people that come together around it. One of the things that I thought was really interesting when I was thinking through the Facebook groups implementation, it was sort of a realization that I think that there's probably a lot of people that are on the internet that are very lonely and who lead probably pretty lonely lives.
I'm sorry, I know. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
And they're all playing Farmville.
Exactly.
They're all watching this show.
They're all going broke.
Right?
My daughter comes in, Daddy, can I have $20 for
They're all paying
this thing?
fingers.
It's about to disappear in 10
Well,
seconds.
you make fun of it, but the reality is, this is a way for people actually to construct meaning in a channel that didn't exist before, and that allows them to actually have shared work and a shared interest that gives them some challenge and some fulfillment. Now, you can, of course, belittle what their efforts are going towards if you want to, but it's hard to sort of draw a judgment on the things that we spend our time doing, developing technologies and formats and, bitching about this stuff compared with what anybody else spends their time doing. And so I think that maybe what you're getting at, and what I think is interesting about the Facebook groups facility, is that there will always be people who take on different roles in these channels and networks. There will be those who are the producers, those who are the organizers, those who are the sort of audience, the watchers, the ones who come along and sort of make sense of things. They pull things apart and then they reassemble them in smaller pieces for other people to consume. And that's part of this information digestive system that's starting to emerge now, that's happening because in some ways, to extend the metaphor terribly, we are now developing sort of complex carbohydrates of data. And we're able to get much more sustenance out of that by actually pushing this content and data around all these different channels, as opposed to just consuming it as these blobs of glutinous matter like blog posts used to be.
Okay, so Seth, the way that this works is all you have to do is actually talk.
Okay,
and
so I've
you
got
do
2
interrupt.
points.
Okay.
Hearing about these lonely people
Lonely Girl 115, right?
makes me wonder if there's going to be religions created around groups or micro religions. There's clearly going to be marketers that try to hook people into groups for their own benefit. I wonder if the pastor and the preacher and the evangelist of the future is going to use Facebook groups to kind of maintain a captive and very impressionable audience of young, impressionable, lonely people.
I think this goes back to what Robert was talking about before, which is the all the lonely people, right? Where do they all? The notion of sort of self-healing that is implied in groups as Facebook has implemented it. It may be a crap fest, but it very quickly, since everybody's name is there, it becomes your problem if you start to spam the group.
Yeah.
So similar in my mind to the transition from news groups, which I know that as developers and programmers, many of you have more fondness for it than I do. But the problem with news groups always to me is that it develops a sort of an autonomy and a hierarchy of people who are very smart arguing over who's smartest as opposed to getting work done. And the blogs came along, and I think primarily through Dave Weiner's force of will, in insisting, even though I think at this point it's irrelevant whether you post it on a blog or in a comment or in a tweet or whatever, but insisting on the notion that each of us are independent nodes that can basically fire into the swarm and participate in a larger conversation. I think that sort of took that on successfully. I think now, though, with the decoupling of the signals from the so-called content base, if we can add in this notion of who the people are, that it will tend to start to regulate or self-regulate these groups so that they become more productive. And I think that's what I'm hearing, when religion enters, it obviously means that we're very close to passing the collection plate.
So, Steve, the other thing this may be a different direction, but when you were reminiscing about 4 or 5 years ago, as we were talking about the attention economy.
Yeah, you're being blocked by the forces of monetization from talking.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just remember you had profound ideas about ignorance, right? The value of ignoring a signal as a signal in and of itself.
Negative gestures, yes.
Right. And I think that is the one thing that Facebook and Twitter and to a certain extent Foursquare, doesn't provide for, which is I don't know who's ignoring my status updates. I don't know. I could know who's unfollowing me. And I remember there was a service that I was playing with a year ago that would tell me when someone unfollowed me, and I would sort of derive from that, well, what could I write about to cause someone to unfollow me? Facebook doesn't really tell you who unfriends you. You have to find that out indirectly. So I think there is a whole layer of information and metadata around this negative space that rarely comes into the conversation.
I'm not sure I agree with you. I think that a lot of this information is implicit. If you, for example, if you @message somebody or @mention them and they don't respond, if you know what their stream looks like and they're busy responding to everything else on the planet, I mean, the fact is like some things that we don't talk about on the internet, like everybody fundamentally looks at their handle on a daily basis to see what people are talking about them. Mm-hmm. So we know implicitly that if you signal somebody that either they're going to see it and ignore it or see it and respond. That's basically the two modes. And if they're very popular like Scoble, then they have to have a second hurdle, which is to get up above the they need to be saying something that Scoble or someone in his situation finds is representative of larger themes, so that if he responds to that person, there are a lot of other people who are reading that same information and getting some value out of it, which supports his brand, et cetera, et cetera. So you start to, if you look at it, just stepping back from it, you can see the fingerprints or the footprints of people not saying things, because it's different than what their usual pattern is. You see this a lot in the trade publication business over the years. People who are very smart, who worked for the other team, would never be recognized by, Ziff Davis wouldn't talk about IDG, and et cetera, et cetera. The whole fundamental principle of this show was based on getting people from each of those domains in the same room and basically stub out the not invented here syndrome about conversation. So, there is the ability to be able to gather this information. But what hasn't happened, I don't think yet, is an understanding on the part of people who are pushing data, metadata, onto the network, that they can signal various representations of that, which can then be tooled for and then published, so that we can start to see the kinds of, outline of the things that you're talking about, Seth. Does that make sense?
Seth there.
He's locked up. I don't think,
He froze.
metaphorically, not.
I'm here.
Does that make sense?
Sort of.
Okay.
Not entirely, but it doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. That.
Well, thanks for bringing it up. I appreciate it. Okay. Robert?
I don't know where to take this. In the chat room, we were talking about news groups and
Oh, what about it?
where they went wrong. I think in addition to the hierarchical problems you identified, news groups were open to everybody, and therefore spammers could come in, newbies who took the group down a bad path could come in, trolls could come in, and bad actors could come in, and that's why I got off of news groups pretty early in the world, and discovered these new blogs where I could stay on topic and talk about what interested me, and everybody would have to discuss that. And if somebody wanted to talk about religion, well, that ain't an appropriate place to do it,
Yeah, but, if it's tied in appropriately, it works just fine. I mean,
Yeah.
if there's some sort of resonance across these different affinity groups, that's successful. So it's not really about whether or not things trend toward niches or not. It's more about, let me ask you this. Do you think that blogs have been lapped or passed or even come up to par with this decoupled data coming from the micro-messaging space?
I'm spending almost all my day in Twitter. I mean, I was just watching the stream go by, and almost everything that's interesting there leads me off to a blog. So I think what's changed is the distribution. I used to, look at blogs by going to Dave Weiner's site, or I used to read blogs then by going to Google Reader, and now I read blogs by looking at my Facebook stream or my Twitter stream. And
so it's a socially curated tech meme is
Yeah.
what's emerging.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would point out one other piece about this, and I've been thinking about this a bit lately, and it's sort of, I did a session on this at Open Web Boot Camp last weekend, where it appears that in some respects, blogging as a medium grew up alongside email. And the realization that I had is that by and large, blogs are public. They're sort of designed to be read by everybody. And again, they sort of solved the failing in email, which was a private medium that didn't have a send to everybody address in the to field. So you have blogs growing up on one side as a public channel. You got email growing up on the other side as private communications. And the twain never kind of met in the middle. And that's when you ended up having Twitter and Foursquare Facebook provide...
Same thing.
Yeah, same thing, whatever. Provide a new channel that kind of merged the best of both. And in the beginning, Facebook, imported notes from your blog, and that was a way of generating content that would then be discovered in Facebook, and then people would have semi-private conversations about those notes in the context of Facebook because it felt like a more, shared kind of intimate environment. I'm starting to think that, first of all, the answer to decentralizing social networks is actually still email, or at least email-like identifiers. And of course, I'm half talking about email and half talking about WebFinger. The other piece of it,
direct messages would be the
direct messages is a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
But again, preserving that ability to say, this message should be sent to everybody, and I want to CC these certain individuals so they're pinged specifically so that they see this signal.
or that conflates to groups.
Or
you
groups,
send it
yeah.
to a group, which is a elaborate CC list.
Yeah, so whether it's hashtags, groups, or a CC list, it's a way of indicating an intention that goes beyond just, hey, show this to the world. And I'm starting to think about how we could actually, fall back to email as a basic courier for rich messages across the social web that's completely decentralized and works by upgrading the inbox. So if you can imagine that for every email that gets sent, there's an attached salmon signature so you can verify the source of the email, and an activity stream payload so you know what it was that the person did to generate that email. And if every object in the network has an email address, like for example every photo that I upload to Flickr has its own email address, then that photo then becomes responsible for notifying other people who left comments on that photo when new comments actually arrive. And so you could imagine actually extending the whole decentralized social networking concept through email, which is sunk infrastructure. It's already there, in a way that would work with a lot of people and give sort of a natural upgrade path.
It's interesting. In the chat room, I told Chris to check out this company called Kiha, which I'm under NDA, so I can't reveal too much about it. But it starts with email and your contacts and turns those into a semantic database, I guess, which then you can interact with on your Android phone. And it's the first thing I've seen in a while that might just take me off the iPhone. They want to put it on the iPhone, but Apple's APIs are not available to them to do what they've done with this thing.
Yeah, and of course that's hard-coded. There's no way you can change that ever.
What's hard-coded?
I'm being facetious. Apple has this ability to react,
Absolutely, and we'll see how it plays out, but there's stuff coming that does exactly what Chris just said in a way that
if I just argue with you, you'll just dump the whole thing that you're not supposed to talk about. So
no, I can't.
Okay. Well, we can read between the lines.
But go check it out. It's Kiha, Kiha. You can sign up for the beta. It's a Paul Allen funded company,
and he needs the money.
Coming to Android in November.
Okay, so I want to hear what Kevin thinks about Chris's idea, but I also want to suggest that while I agree with the model, I think it's going to come from micromessaging, not from email. Mostly because just reverse engineering the protocols of email is an endless process which will never finally get done. Whereas...
Yeah, I would say, just to clarify that I see email as being a fallback. So it's like providing like a low source in your image tags. So that people who are still using email as their primary conduit for sharing and socially, sort of experiencing the web, are able to receive these messages. And, it's just like all the email notifications that you get from social networks today. They fill your inbox. It's a centralized place where you get notifications from every network that you're part of. So why isn't your inbox providing you with a news feed that lets you consume that information in a much more, in a much cleaner way?
Well, the experience with Chatter has been that it reduces email by about anywhere from 13 to 35%. So, and the reason it does that is because everybody in the company is on the same page, and with the limitations, of course, or the advantages of groups mixed in with that. So the more that you can offload into a social context, the parsing of streams, whether they're email or micromessages in general, the less the email becomes, a unique data type, and the more that it can get folded into micromessages. That's my
right. But that's part of the point of the WebFinger stuff. So the WebFinger gives you a way to get from the email address to a profile URL and get further metadata about it. But because of that means you can, from a received email, if you have attested who it's from with one of the existing standards, you can go back and look that person up and do the same discovery backwards, which means you can use email as a sort of trusted channel for this information as well, and use it to connect the people who aren't yet on there and bootstrap them into systems where you are actually connected.
Yeah,
so it's a way of bridging it back in.
Except that then you have to have a management tool to manage the visibility of information, as opposed to
so this is the
having
other
it controlled
thing about
by the people who follow, as opposed to
the other thing that's different about this is that when I think about this is less about you consuming more email. In fact, you would actually never see these emails for the most part, especially if you have a smart client. Instead, your email clients, your inbox, would take these messages as signals and would compose almost like a flipboard style kind of interactive view of this content that would be taken from across all your different networks. And this is what I think is really interesting about what Windows, the Windows 7 phone is doing. And who else is? Oh, and Hotmail actually. Inside of, is it Hotmail? I think Hotmail's doing, where they're providing you these media views of your content. So I guess what I'm suggesting and starting to think about is how we can actually use like a JSON blob of activity stream content as an attachment, as an extra MIME type in email, coupled with like a simple, hopefully simple signature method to verify the provenance of a message to reduce at least some forgery aspects. And then we could figure out how to actually decentralize these networks using existing infrastructure. So whether they're micro messages or not, I'm just using email as a gateway that people understand.
Well,
they know how to
it's a
scale.
transport, basically.
Yeah, as a transport,
Yeah.
right. So you never actually read most of these emails.
Right. Well, I mean, much the same way that RSS is used these days as a transport. Yeah. Okay. Seth, you have any thoughts on this?
Oh.
Was that a no?
That was a no.
Yeah, okay. It was clipped. Okay. I want to go once around the table, and then we'll wrap this up. Let's start with Robert Scoble.
I don't know. Groups are interesting. We're all waiting for Google to come out with its social thing and take me on a ride in that fantastic car.
You had the first video of it, didn't you? You didn't even know it.
One of the first. I don't think I was actually first. There was one guy who had one in November of last year, and my first one was December of last year. So I had the second video and third video.
But you didn't know it.
I didn't know it. I was driving right next to it.
Somebody's coming in to steal your camera, just impound it for that reason. Okay, Kevin.
I think we've seen a bunch of positive stuff this week, both from Facebook with that opening up stuff, and from the Windows group, both in the phone and in Messenger, connecting into open standards for this piece. So I think we're getting there, but it's always like working in parallel about multiple companies, not waiting for Google to sort of drop some bomb and fix the world. That's my take on it now.
Seth, any thoughts, and that can be on any subject?
Yeah, I think Google's earnings were really impressive, and I think we're moving into a very, very bullish time in the market where a lot of public in the spring, and that will bring with it, I think, a great deal of M&A.
Who's going to go public in the
done
spring?
And startups getting bought.
Who's going to go public in the spring?
I would say perhaps Zynga, Demand Media, maybe a handful of others.
Mm-hmm.
Jive.
I think Jive. Facebook will be ground zero, but that might not be until late next year, or early the following year.
Chris?
I think the thing that I've been thinking a lot about is one, how to make decentralized social networking actually as easy as the proprietary networks to implement, adopt, and support. So that means looking at familiar models that people are familiar with. And the second thing that I've been thinking about is about the distance. I see like this, when I think about open source, I see this like very deep kind of molten core where open source makes a lot of sense in terms of infrastructure. And I'm finding it harder and harder to find, that little like sort of, surface crust on the top where it makes sense for a lot of this open web work to happen that ends up touching users. And I think this is a fundamental challenge that we in this community kind of have to think about in terms of broadening the number of people who are in our community and the message that we have to the world. Because that's something that, if I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing and selling the stuff that I'm selling, I have to have a great message for a lot of, bigger brands and bigger companies that could actually adopt these things and help keep the web open and free in a way that actually also helps their business. So it's not necessarily related to anything we talked about today, but those are things that I'm thinking about.
All right. Well, what I've been thinking about is how much I appreciate Rackspace for sponsoring this show, and particularly Rob Legess for helping get it back on the air. Newtek and their TriCaster for making this a video show. Today, those who are listening on audio are going to be somewhat confused by some times when I purposely reacted to and suggested reactions to video, looks, nods, etc. So those of you who want to get the full content are going to have to watch it on YouTube or join us again next time live. I want to thank everybody who showed up, and especially those who didn't. This is Steve Gillmor. This has been the Gillmor Gang, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.
Cheers.